My name is Ron Sawin. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Business here at Lincoln Way High School District 210. There are two purposes to tonight's meeting, okay? It is a public hearing, but there are actually two parts to this public hearing. Part of it is for the fiscal year 2016 budget. The other part is for a proposed inter-fund transfer that will be presented to the Board of Education at tomorrow night's meeting, okay? To give you a little timeline here, the initial presentation to the Board of Education on some of the components of the budget was made at the regularly scheduled meeting on Thursday, July 16th. The budget has been on display from July 20th at 8 a.m. 2015 to the present. The budget is a working document, and as such there have been some revisions along the way as we've received more data to make it a more timely and accurate budget. We'll talk about some of those tonight as we go through this. Okay? As I said earlier, there are actually two public hearings this evening. They're both rolling together. One is for a proposed inter-fund transfer, which I'll explain to you in a moment, and then the other is the actual budget hearing. Both of these items, the fund transfer as well as the formal budget, are on the board agenda for approval at tomorrow night's meeting. Okay? The full budget will be posted on our website, pending board approval, starting on September 11th. Okay? So first thing Friday morning, it will go up on there. As I mentioned earlier, I know a couple people walked in just a moment ago. We have optional sign-up sheets over there. You're not required to sign. It's a public meeting, so anybody can be here, come in and out. That's not why they're there. The sole reason for that sign-up sheet is if you would like us to email you a copy of the budget once it's been approved, assuming it's approved, we'll do that. I'll do that on Friday morning. So that's the only reason for that, okay? And if you haven't signed up yet and you want to before you leave, please feel free to do that. Okay? All right. First things first, the inter-fund transfer. The proposal, the recommendation that we will make to the Board of Education tomorrow night is that we transfer $4 million from the building fund to the education fund, okay? And the reason for this is very straightforward. In fiscal year 2015, which closed on June 30th, our education fund had a negative fund balance. When you're on the cash basis of accounting, you cannot have a negative fund balance in any of your funds. So because the building fund had a larger fund balance, we will be proposing that the board approve this transfer so you can see the changes. So the education fund moves to a positive fund balance. The building fund remains with a positive fund balance. And again, it's to make sure that they have a positive starting fund balance. And this is important because we cannot submit the budget to the state without positive fund balances to start with. Okay? All right.
Brian, real quick, the budget shows that we're starting with, it doesn't show this transfer. Right? It shows that we're starting with as if the transfer had been made on June 30th.
The budget shows the transfer in there. It's running under the assumption that the board will approve it. If they don't approve it, then we're going to have to revise the budget. That's why I said it was a working document. So right now it's under the assumption it will be. Okay? All right. Some underlying assumptions for the budget development. Okay? And just so everybody knows, I'm going to try and go through this quickly, but not too quickly, but I want to leave some time for questions at the end if there are any. Okay, so I just want to give you a bit of an overview. First of all, from a revenue standpoint, the bulk of our revenues come from either local or state sources. Okay? On the local revenue side, we build upon the 2014 levy year extension of $59,700. Well, you can see the number up there. That again is from the levy year 14, calendar year 14, the taxes of which, or the extension of which, is distributed in calendar year 15. So the first part of the extension went in the last fiscal year. The second part of the extension goes in this fiscal year that we're currently in. So one of the challenges associated with budgeting is that, especially in the suburban area where we rely primarily on real estate taxes, we have to build a budget when we only know half of the real estate extension. The other real estate extension monies will not be known until next spring. Okay? However, in the budget projections, we did utilize the known 2014 CPI of 0.8%. That's what will be applied to your taxes as part of the tax caps, is the common term. Formal term is the Property Tax Extension Limitation Act. We're estimating at this point in time $50 million in new property. The new property is an important component because new property is not subject to the tax cap components. It comes on and gets taxed at its full new value. Okay? Now, one of the things, we talked about this very briefly at the July board meeting. If you were at the July board meeting and you saw the fiscal year 15 closeout, we had surpluses, not massive surpluses, but good-sized surpluses in the municipal retirement fund as well as the tort fund. Interestingly enough, using state of Illinois guidelines, neither of those funds have a role in the calculation of values for things such as financial watch list or recognition or warning or anything else. So one of the things we will do with the 2015 levy when it's filed in December is we will adjust both our tort and municipal retirement levies to move more of that money to the ed fund and or the building fund. We can't do anything with the levy that already exists, but we can do that with the one upcoming. Okay? Now, state revenues, I've got some information there, but I'm going to go through the state revenues in a little more detail in a moment. Okay? So, but this is the primary thing about local revenues. There are some other local revenues that are not listed here, but they are included in the budget. Yes, sir?
Great question. The tort fund falls outside of the PTEL, right?
No, no. The PTEL, the tax cap, is applied to your entire extension. So, now the way that works, this was our extension in everything but bond and interest. Okay? Bond and interest falls outside the tax cap because that's like a mortgage payment. So the way the PTEL would work, let's assume that there was no new property at all. Then this can only be increased by 0.8%. But that amount increased by the 0.8% or the tax cap can be spread out among any of the funds that we levy in. But all of the funds, ed, building, transportation, municipal retirement, special education, tort, they all, even working cash, they all fall under the tax caps. None of them are outside the tax caps. All right. Let's talk about general state aid. Okay? The estimated payment, and you can see I've quoted the source. This is available to every one of you at the State Board of Education website, isbe.net. Okay? You can actually find the general state aid entitlement for any public school district in the state of Illinois on that website. Not only for the current year, but for past years as well. Okay? Now, according to the document that is on this website right now, they're telling us as a district that for fiscal year 16, we're going to get $5.18 million and a little bit of change. Okay? Now, in our budget, we're only putting in $4.4 million. Okay? And I'm going to tell you the exact reason. You'll hear this a couple of times tonight. Okay? With our budget process, we want to be conservative and potentially underestimate revenues and overestimate expenses. The reason for that is very simple. If we overestimate expenses and then they end up turning out to be less than we budget, that works to our advantage. Likewise, if we underestimate revenues and then they turn out to be more than we budget, that works to our advantage. But basically it builds a budget that gives us a direction that keeps a little cautionary items in there. Now the reason for this conservative estimate is right here. Okay? Now this is not a huge difference, but this is something that people need to be aware of. Okay? At this time last year, if you would have gone on to that state website and looked at the estimated payments, you would have seen this number. Okay? But then in late February, the state of Illinois notified us that no, instead of this, we're going to pay you this. So what they did on our last 4 state aid payments, you get 22 state aid payments a year. They go from August through June to a month. Okay? What the state of Illinois did, and you can go to the website and see under the calculation of entitlement and the payment schedule, they just changed our last 4 payments. They simply notified us and every other school district, so it's not just Lincoln Way. They notified every other school district, instead of paying it at 89%, we're going to pay it at 87%, and so we're going to adjust your last 4 payments. Okay? So because we've lived through that, and this year, this number is assuming that they're going to prorate the state aid entitlement at 92%. In other words, when we completed the state aid calculation form and we submitted all our data to the state, it comes back using their form, and again, you can get that from their website, saying, well, Lincoln Way, you're entitled to $5.7 million, but we're only going to pay you 92% of it, so it's that 5.2. Okay? The other thing we have to consider, we're at September 9th, the state is still without a budget. Okay? And that'll be mentioned in a moment, but that's important to consider. Okay? Now, in terms of mandated category, oh, yes, ma'am.
And you're comfortable with assuming that you're going to get 92% versus what you actually got at 87%?
No. That's why I used 4.4 million. See, I didn't use, this is the 92%.
Got it, okay.
Okay? So because I'm not comfortable, but that's a great question, and I appreciate your asking it.
Because in all likelihood, you're going to get
Less than
probably
that.
85.
Which is why we're using this in our budget. That's the conservative nature that we're trying to take with this. Okay? Thank you for asking. Now, on mandated categoricals are monies that we receive from the state that have a designated purpose. There might be some special education funding. There might be transportation funding. There are a number of different items that are in there. Now, interestingly enough, if you go on the state website, most of these are not posted. You can go to the State Board of Education website. There's something called a FRIS inquiry, Financial Reporting Information System. When you go there and look at any of the school districts, most of the mandated categoricals are not listed because, again, the state is without a budget. So they can't put numbers in. Now, the one numbers that we do have from the mandated categoricals, because we have to complete a transportation claim, are our numbers for transportation. According to the claim, we're entitled to a total of $1.76 million, which is slightly above what we received in fiscal year 15. Again, that's according to the claim. But we don't know if they're going to fully fund it. So what we're doing is we're estimating this, if you take 75% of that, you get here. So this is what we budgeted. So again, we're budgeting only 75% of what the claim says we should get. Now the reason for that, if you're wondering, in fiscal year 2015, which ended June 30th, most categorical payments come in 4 equal payments. In fiscal year 2015, the state only paid us 3. Now, They did eventually pay the fourth one, but it came in this fiscal year. So it can't count on fiscal year 15 closeouts. It doesn't matter that we were supposed to get it in fiscal year 15, they paid it after July 1st. Well, since they only paid 3 during last fiscal year, for this fiscal year, we're budgeting 3. Some people will say, well, wait a minute, you already got 1. So, and if they pay 3, yeah, that's true. But again, we're sitting in a state without a budget. So we would rather underestimate the revenue. If we end up getting more than 1.3 million, that works to everybody's benefit.
Ron, the starting balance of that account includes the payment that was made in this fiscal year rather than last fiscal year.
No, the fund balance in that account had to start as of July 1st. So as of July 1st, we didn't have that payment.
So where is that payment?
It will get incorporated. So if we get 3 categoricals during this year, then we'll be ahead because of that fourth one that we received in July.
But it's going to be there somewhere. It's not listed. Because you're getting the income.
You're right. We've got
The
one
actuals will
payment.
be there.
There is no guarantee that we're going to get any more payments.
So if I see a budget versus actual report, I will see the budget of 1.3, and I'm going to see the actual already shows.
Yes. So when we close out fiscal year 16, or as we're getting close, and we do the comparison, right, you'll see what our budgeted amount was and what came in, and at that point in time, we'll be able to explain it. You have to understand that I've been through times in this state when the state only gave us 2 categorical payments in a fiscal year.
Right, so if I saw a budget versus actual report for November, I would see that actual amount in there, even if you never got the
Yes.
from the state.
Yeah,
Correct? That's
correct.
what I'm saying. All right,
Yes.
okay.
All right, expenses. We based all of our expenses on 2015 expenditures. Our salary expenditures were held flat because although there was a 1% raise for some of our employees based upon contractual requirements, okay, those raises were actually offset by retirees and some personnel reductions that we made from last year to this year, okay? You have to understand, let's say we had a couple math teachers that retired, okay? Even if we need to replace them, based upon sections, you're now replacing a teacher with 35 years of experience with a teacher that might be brand new or only have 1 or 2 years of experience. So there's a substantial difference in salaries between those two. So there's some inherent savings that are built into this, okay? Our health insurance expenditures were increased by 2.5%. Again, no numbers based upon our health insurance agreement, okay? That, by the way, is better than the national trend. Now, we anticipate it will be less because we've had a number of people, a number of employees that have shifted from a PPO option to an HMO option by their choice. And by shifting to that, the expense, the board share expense is lower, and so is the employee expense. So because of that, we actually feel that, again, we're overestimating those expenditures. And a reminder, like all school districts, okay, salaries and benefits are our greatest expenditure.
When does the existing contract expire?
The existing contract expires for the teachers at the end of the 17-18 school year. For the support staff, that contract expires at the end of this current year.
Okay, so that plays a part in forecasting
Yes.
3 years out.
All right, now, this is just a repeat as a reminder. In terms of building and supplies expenditures, we increased them by 2% based simply on inflation numbers, okay? No matter what we do, we can't control what happens outside the 4 walls of Lincoln Way High School. And companies that we work with can occasionally and do occasionally raise their prices based on their expenses. Again, we're hoping that that's overestimated if those other companies run true to the CPI. If their expenses went up at the true cost of living, the CPI, then their expenses went up at 0.8. So by doing this, again, overestimating. Our utility expenditures are held flat, okay? They should be a little bit less this year because we've done some revised management with some of our air handling systems in terms of adjusting when the air is on, when the air is off, taking a little more control over that. Okay? In the transportation fund, again, parts and supplies increased by 2% because those are costs going to outside vendors that we can't necessarily control. Our fuel and lease expenditures have been held flat. Okay? Now, technically, our lease expenditure dropped because we had some buses come off lease and we replaced them with 30 buses that actually have a lower lease payment. So again, by holding them flat, even though we know part of it is lower, that gives us a little bit of cushion by overestimating that expense a bit. Okay? The fuel, the reason that we held fuel a little bit flat is because we're in a situation where, right now anyway, diesel prices, and our buses are all on diesel, so we have to watch those, not gasoline prices. Diesel prices have remained pretty flat so far. Okay? Tort expenditures have been held flat. Our liability expenses like workman's comp and things of that nature are known through December 31st. So half of the fiscal year expenses were known when we put this budget together. Now, overall, and we reported on this at the July board meeting, we anticipated the budget having about a $5.5 million deficit. Okay? The revision, based upon some of the information that's come in since that was presented to the board, is now at roughly $5.2 million. It's not a situation any one of us wants to be in, by any stretch of the imagination. Okay? But again, we're hoping that if we have adequately underestimated revenues and overestimated expenses, 5.2 million is on the high end. When we're in July, we would rather be coming to the public saying, oh, we anticipated it being 5.2 million, it was only 4.8, instead of it being the other way around. Not that only 4.8 is good, but I hope you can understand the logic there. When we close it out, we're hoping to be in a better situation. Now, because of the circumstances that come into play, we may end up having to file an amended budget in the spring, once we see what happens with some of the categorical payments, what happens with some of the other revenue payments. We're going to have to judge that as we get a little bit closer. But if we do that, of course, it would be announced in public. Okay? Because we do have a deficit budget, we are required to file a deficit reduction plan. That deficit reduction plan has to be part of the budget. So when the budget goes on display, again, assuming board approval tomorrow night, when the budget goes on display, this will be part of it. I know some of this is hard to read, but just to kind of go through it quickly, we know that the board has made a decision to close Lincoln Way North, and attendance is going to be adjusted, okay? Attendance boundaries, I should say, attendance centers. Now, assumptions used in the reduction plan. The foundation level for general state aid, we've kind of already talked about that. We dropped it from the amounts actually received to be on the safe side, and then we held it flat moving out. In terms of equalized assessed valuation and tax rates, okay? We already know we've got a 0.8 CPI that can be applied, but after that, we're holding it flat. Okay. The other components, employee salaries and benefits. Salaries and benefits in the deficit reduction plan will reflect a significant drop in fiscal year 2017 as we go from 4 schools to 3. The cuts impacting employees district-wide will have the same monetary value regardless of the school closed, and we're then holding that forward in fiscal year 18 and 19. Salaries and benefits do reflect a modest increase of 1.5% that will be more than offset by the retirement of more than 25 employees. We have 25 employees that are retiring in the next 3 years, 25 teachers. There's actually a few more when we put all the employees in. Short and long-term borrowing. It is anticipated that we are going to have to utilize some short-term borrowing at the end of this current fiscal year so that we can report positive fund balances, okay? The educational impact, the plan has been selected as a strategy that allows the district to address the financial issues without impacting academic, co-curricular, and extracurricular programs. And by that we mean the same courses will be offered to the students. Now, how many sections of each course will be determined the same way it's always determined, by what the students select to take. Yes, sir.
Quick question. When you're doing the budget summary, when you're putting it all together in your package that you guys have made, do you do it by, or do you do a budget up summary? In other words, do you do it by school?
No, the budget is by the
Transportation cost
district.
is a summary over all of the schools?
Yes.
The 3 schools we have left?
The budget, we're required to do a district budget. So the budget we submit to the state of Illinois must be a district budget.
Yeah, but when you're
It's-
making that budget, are you growing it from the existing schools, or is that not something that you guys are?
No, we do it all as a district.
Okay.
We do everything as a district. Yes,
So
sir.
let me ask this, if you're doing it all by a district, your money is allocated by your student population. So each building, what you're saying that Lincoln Way North Central all have the same budget for building budget?
Well, it depends on which part of the building budget you're
I'm
referring
talking
to.
about my salary, my transportation, my instructional materials, my 1,000, my 400, my 1,000, my 200.
The salaries, benefits, and transportation are all done as district
As your
numbers.
district, but your building, I think what he's saying is that building budget. For example, there are 4 schools in a district, and you're saying that A school has this amount of money allocated. B school has the same amount allocated, so it's equally distributed.
No,
Okay,
No.
so does the district, each school have their own budget?
they have budget line items that
Yes,
are
they
unique
do.
to the school.
So that's unique for each school, so each amount is different, each allocation.
But it's not every single item. For example,
No, that's not what we're
Okay.
asking. Does each building have a budget? For line items?
each budget or each building has certain line items attached to it. But if you were to ask me, for example, what is the budget for Lincoln Way East? Okay? I can give you the budget for parts of Lincoln Way East, but there are parts of the budget that are not broken up by
They are
building
taken from the district.
from the district,
So,
right?
for example, you will have a budget that says, this is what I get for my idea money, correct? For the
Right.
district.
Yes,
Then you will have, this is how much the district is going to compensate for special education because the idea monies are not gonna cover that. Am I
Right.
Correct.
yes.
So you would have a budget, say, for example, something for the athletes, for your athletic budget. So each district would have, each building would have a line item for that.
Yes, and athletics is a great example because, okay, some of the buildings with a higher population will need a higher athletic budget than the buildings with a smaller population.
Let's look away from that.
Okay.
Instructional materials and supplies.
Right,
Because of the number of kids in our population of a school district, your instructional supplies.
Supplies
and
will be-
materials should be larger, am I correct?
they will be larger
So
at the
each
buildings
district,
with a
each
bigger
building
population.
does have line item.
Yes, yes, but all I'm saying is that the overall budget that we submit to the state has to be as a district.
And your schools are identified in that budget by a certain RCD code, or how do you identify that?
Each of our schools have an individual RCDT code, you are correct. However, when we submit the
You
budget
submit it under the district.
as the district, exactly.
So we
And we
could.
don't break it
so
out.
we could potentially have salaries per school, we could have transportation costs per school. Correct?
We could
Or you
We
didn't-
could
or
drill
we-
it down to that point.
Well, that's what I'm asking, when you make the budget, are you doing it from that point?
When we make the budget, we look at it from a district perspective, and here's the reason why. Let's use transportation as an example, okay? We have a bus that in the morning starts out and it picks up kids and takes them to the West High School. but because the West High School starts earlier than the Central High School, that bus can now drop those kids off and come over and pick up kids and bring them to Central. So we can't take the cost of that bus, for example, and say,
I get it.
it's just West, because it's split. Yes?
Are the line items that she was referring to publicly available?
Yes.
How would
What
we
do you
obtain
call
that?
it? What do we call that?
We call it the line item budget. Yeah.
Which is what's gonna be published on the website, right?
For the building.
There are multiple components to the line item budget. There are some line items that are district-wide, salaries and benefits, for example. There are some line items that are school-specific.
How do we find that information, the school-specific?
We can print you a copy of the account numbers.
We were trying to obtain that.
Yeah,
You
so do you
could-
want to buy, say for instance, if it's instructional or if it's a salary account, you need to have it asked in the manner of 1,100, 1,200, 1,400, for each line item?
No, you don't have to break it down to that, no.
What should we ask for when we
Ask for the line item budget.
We have asked for that and it's not been given to us.
Actually, the requests I've received have been for line item detail of expenditures. That's different than the line item budget.
So-
I have not been asked for a line item budget.
So if you ask for a line item
Budget.
and then I'm surely every quarter you're doing expenditure reports because you have to submit
We
that.
do expenditure reports monthly.
So therefore, you should have an account of what has been allocated for, expended, as well as what you all have
Yes.
paid, the invoices, the bills. You have all the documentation to
Yes.
go with it for each account number.
Correct.
So if we ask line item budget, we can also ask line item actual. Correct?
Yes,
Budget
you can.
So if we had to request the line item budget, what's gonna be published on the website?
What's going to be published on the website is what we're required to submit to the state of Illinois, the district-wide budget.
With line item detail, or?
No, because that's not required by the state of Illinois. Whether it's us or any other school district, the budget that we file with them has to use their form. Their form does not allow you to break it down by building.
Well, here's a suggestion, you got a room full of people here that are interested in a line item budget, why don't we put it on the website?
Be happy to do that.
Thank you.
All right, some other assumptions that are in the deficit reduction plan. It does not incorporate any assumptions regarding changes to the funding practices utilized by the state of Illinois. So in other words, we have not built in at this point in time the impact of a potential property tax freeze or the impact of a potential pension cost shift. We haven't built them in because we don't want to create a budget that's built upon assumptions, okay? Also, the district will be examining every available opportunity to sell vacant land, okay? And I know you might not be able to see it, but over on the map, we have 3 parcels of vacant land. So we will look into, one's at 191st in Harlem, and there's 2 in Manhattan. So we will look at some options for that. As many of you know, we were trying to sell the one at 191st in Harlem, but that one kind of fell through.
Can I ask you something?
Absolutely.
On the revenue side, the tax revenue, the assumption is 0.8% inflation for the retail.
Correct.
So that there's zero new property.
No, with that, we incorporated 50 million in new property.
But that's not included in the budget.
Yes, it is. When I made the estimate, when I put in the numbers for how much we're going to get in the tax extension for the education fund, for the building fund across, I took the total and then divided it up.
For this year, but for projecting it for the 3 years out for the deficit reduction plan.
For the next The years after fiscal year 16, it was held flat. But for
So-
fiscal year
so-
16,
Okay, so there's no new property for going forward after this current fiscal
No.
year? Okay, so that's.
because we wanted to be conservative,
It's 50 million, that's roughly 1.5%, right? Roughly,
roughly,
yeah.
roughly. So about $750,000 in new revenue.
That's conservative, and then on the revenue side, and then also 0.8% inflation is pretty conservative, right? And it's,
Well, for fiscal year 16, it's known, because they used the fiscal year 14 CPI.
We were just talking about the deficit reduction plan.
Right.
So that's why, that's sort of the nature of my question is.
We kept it as conservative as possible after fiscal year 16. Because we don't want to throw in a number, oh, let's assume we have $200 million in new property. No. Err on the side of being too conservative. And that way, if we end up having 50 or 60 million in new property, it works to our
It's good for
advantage.
people to understand, you know, that it's conservative.
Oh, absolutely. And
Basis is-
that's why I've been trying to say it all night long. Underestimate revenues and overestimate expenses.
On the general state aid, that might actually be declining, right? Because of declining enrollment and declining, or increased ability to pay that goes into the.
Well, actually,
and declining enrollment.
the interesting thing about general state aid, because when it looks at available local resources, it's 2 to 3 years behind. Even if EAV goes up, on the GSA calculation, it's using the lower EAV numbers because it's 2 years behind when you look at the calculation of entitlement. So the interesting thing, when the market crashed, or when the economy crashed, I should say, it took a couple of years before we noticed it in general state aid because it lags a couple of years behind. Well, likewise, when the market recovers, it takes a couple of years for that to catch up as well.
I'm just pointing out that the general state aid is going to trend downward unless there's a miracle in Springfield that says the foundation level is going to go up. They're never going to do that. So general state aid is going to be declining. We know that. And you're holding general state aid flat.
Right.
For the
Flat
future.
at a number that was substantially below the
So you
entitlement
feel
that
comfortable
we
with
have.
that as far as being able to.
Yes, if I did not feel comfortable, I would not have put it